everybody, it is Katie here, and you already know what time it is. It's time to talk about Shadowhunters. So, episode 5, titled Dust and Shadows. I'm going to do what I did last week and just talk about the more key scenes in the episode rather than go through it bit by bit, because I feel like when I do that it turns into more of a recap than an actual discussion. You've all seen the episode, I hope, so you know what I'm talking about. You don't need me to recap it. So this episode is following the fallout from episode 4, in which Jocelyn died unexpectedly. So yeah, we have to deal with that in this episode. I feel like this episode was Shadowhunters doing its own thing, because it's a storyline that's really deviated from the books. Obviously, Jocelyn's death does not happen in the books, she's still alive. So this is the writer's own storyline, really. And I was expecting this episode to be theirs rather than following the book content. They did say that they'd deviate from the books this season, so I was looking forward to seeing what they had in store. This episode focuses a lot on Clary's grief after her mum's death, and also on Alec's guilt, because even though he was possessed when he killed Jocelyn, he obviously feels responsible for it, and he's very awkward and doesn't know how to react to Clary. Clary and Simon share a scene at the start of the episode where Simon is doing a Hebrew prayer for Jocelyn, which I thought was a really nice touch, by the way, because I like how the show does bring up the fact that he's Jewish, because that's an important part of his character, so I like that they are reminding us of that all the time, rather than just letting it go unnoticed. All of these things help make Simon the character that he is, so I thought that was a really lovely scene. But Clary's conversation with Simon puts the idea into her head that she can bring her mum back from the dead somehow. Her first instinct is to go to Magnus for help. Of course, Magnus was never gonna help her achieve that, and he does warn Clary against it. Whilst Clary is talking to Magnus, we do get a bit more of Magnus's backstory. He brings up the fact that his mum couldn't cope with her son being a warlock. He talks about her freaking out when she saw his cat eyes, and then he tells Clary that his mum killed herself because she couldn't deal with that. I really like that scene because once again it's adding more layers to Magnus's character, and it's showing us what he's been through in his life. And I like the fact that he opened up to Clary and told her that. I really adore the relationship between Magnus and Clary, because he does feel a little bit responsible for her because he's watched her grow up all these years. So it was a nice touch when he took the memory from his head and turned it into a photograph. That picture was of Jocelyn and Clary when Clary was very young, and that was just such a sweet and lovely moment. And a soft aside to Magnus as well. Also, Magnus called Clary Biscuit again. I love it when he calls her Biscuit. It's just the cutest thing ever. I want to be called Biscuit by Magnus Bane. That's such an honour. Can you imagine? So yeah, I love the two of them. Even though Magnus won't help Clary, she still wants to go ahead with it. She is determined to bring Jocelyn back. So she ends up finding another warlock on this database that they have in the Institute, and she goes to visit her. This warlock woman is extremely creepy. You know that not all is what it seems with her. There's this scene where she brings a raven back from the dead. The magic in that whole scene looked really cool, but it was creepy as well. Obviously you can't bring anything back from the dead without repercussions. That type of magic is dark. Nothing good is gonna come from it. But obviously Clary is grieving, she's upset, she just wants her mum back. She's not gonna think rationally about it, so she ends up trusting this warlock woman. I just need to mention as well that the music throughout this episode was so on point. Throughout all the scenes with this creepy warlock woman, there was this very sinister tune in the background. And I know we do have a new composer for this season. He's doing his job well, because the music in this episode was great. I like having a variety of songs playing in the episodes, but you can't beat a good original score. So I'm glad that we've got some of that this season. It just added to the atmosphere of this episode, because it was a very dark episode, I think. So this warlock says to Clary that she will bring Jocelyn back, she just needs a lock of her hair, and then for payment, she asks Clary for a favour. Nothing good is going to come of that. When somebody says that they'll do something in exchange for a favour, you know it's not going to end well. But Clary, poor naive little Clary in this episode, agrees to go along with it. When Clary goes back to the warlock later in the episode, Alec decides to come with her because, like I said before, he feels extremely guilty. And so he is determined to help Clary however he can. So he goes along with her back to this warlock. Of course, Alec is wary of this woman from the minute she opens the door. She tells him to leave his bow and arrow, which is never a good sign. I loved their reaction as well when the warlock assumed that Alec was Clary's boyfriend. Ah, their faces. That awkward moment when everyone assumed you're heterosexual. Eventually we end up finding out what this woman is truly up to while she is attempting to bring Jocelyn back to life. The raven from earlier on in the episode starts tapping outside the window and then ends up breaking in and flying around. The warlock grabs the raven and snaps its neck. That wasn't creepy at all, but this is the thing that finally snaps Clary out of it and tells her that this isn't what it seems. But of course, as she's trying to escape, the warlock ends up locking her in, and she reveals what favour she wants from Clary. She plans to make a warlock baby between a demon, obviously, and a Shadowhunter. And unfortunately, Clary ends up being that unlucky Shadowhunter. When she revealed that that was what she wanted, I was like, okay, this episode is a lot darker than I thought it was going to be. I knew there was something sinister about this warlock. I knew something was going on, I just didn't know what. But when she said that it was because she wanted a Shadowhunter warlock baby, yeah, that was disturbing. So poor Clary ends up being put in a basement. This demon is let in, and that thing was absolutely horrific. The way that it, like, crawled in, that demon was a disturbing demon. And I'm very glad that it was stopped before it achieved its goal, because for a second there I was wondering if the show was going to go there, because I really don't know how I'd have felt about that. So I'm very glad that we didn't reach that point and that the demon actually didn't attack Clary. Clary stops the demon because she sees a rune, draws the rune on her hand, shoots some light at the demon and gets rid of it. I'm so happy that Clary is finally getting her rune powers, because I was wondering if they were just going to ignore that in the show, because it hasn't been brought up at all yet. When Jace catches her killing this demon with the rune, he tells her to keep it just between them. So I'm assuming we're going to explore that in the rest of the season. Clary's going to realise that she can actually create runes. So I'm looking forward to the development of that. So that was the main sort of storyline that was going on in this episode, but there were other things going on as well. Let's take a moment to talk about Malec. We got one Malec scene in this episode, and honestly, could we ask for a more perfect scene? This scene is so important. Alec is feeling terrible about what happened with Jocelyn. At the start of the episode, Jace tries to talk to him but doesn't manage to get through to him. Alec ends up jumping off the roof of the Institute and going AWOL. He shows up later at Magnus's apartment because he can't stand to be in the Institute with everything going on. Magnus notices as well that he hasn't used the healing rune on himself, which made me quite sad because I felt like that was Alec's way of punishing himself. Maybe he felt like he deserved to be hurting at that time because he feels responsible for Jocelyn's death. So that was really sad. I also love that Magnus seems to be Alec's safe place. When things are getting too much for him elsewhere, he comes to Magnus, which really shows his true feelings towards Magnus as well. Alec asks Magnus about handing over Camille, and Magnus admits that it was difficult. And then when Magnus asks if that's weird, Alec says that it isn't. Now, one of the things that I really didn't like in the books about Alec's character was the way he reacted to Magnus's bisexuality. He really didn't act respectful at all when it came to the past lovers in Magnus's life, especially with Camille as well, and he really didn't seem to like the fact that it was a woman. So I am absolutely thrilled that the show doesn't have Alec being moody and sulking about that. He doesn't care that Magnus has been with women in the past. So I'm really happy that the show has gone in that direction rather than having Alec react the way he did in the books. This scene was just beautiful in showcasing what a healthy relationship they have. I just can't wait to see more of them in the future and see how this relationship develops in the show. Because I feel like any issues that I had with their relationship in the books, the show is correcting them. So I couldn't ask for more really when it comes to Malec. Another storyline that we have in this episode is Simon moving back home. He wants to be with his family, but obviously the vampire side of things is going to make that difficult. There's a scene where he's reunited with his sister, and that was all really sweet and lovely until she found his blood. This seems quite painful to watch as well because he was trying to joke it away, but it wasn't actually funny because we knew how much he was panicking about it, and we knew how weird that must look to his sister as well. So I thought these scenes with Simon at home were really well written this week. Obviously his mum comes to talk to him about the blood, and he actually decides to open up and admit that he's a vampire. I'm very glad that his mum thought it was a joke at first, because whenever you have these sort of scenes in supernatural shows and books and films, whenever somebody admits that they are a supernatural creature, you don't actually get that many people who laugh and think it's a prank. But in reality, that's what you would assume. If somebody told me that they were a vampire, I'd think that they were taking the mick. So I'm glad that his mum laughed, and that was actually quite funny. But then, of course, she realises that he's being serious. She hugs him and tells him that it's going to be fine, but then later on, she's on the phone to a doctor. So she thinks that this is something Simon is making up in his head. So I'm very interested to see how this storyline is going to play out. And I'm wondering when she is actually going to realise that he is genuinely a vampire. Because we saw a scene towards the end where she walks in and catches him drinking the blood from a rat. I don't know whether she's going to believe that he's a vampire after this, or whether she's just going to think that this is a more disturbing part of his delusion. So we'll see how that goes next week. Another thing I wanted to talk about from this episode, Yin Fen. Yeah, that made an appearance this week. Izzy's injury from the previous episode hasn't recovered the way she wants it to. She finds out that Victor is sending a mission to the Iron Sisters, and because Izzy has been interested in the Iron Sisters her whole life, she is determined to go. Victor inspects her wound and tells her that she's not up for it, but then he offers her a way to heal it quicker, and it's Yin Fen. Obviously we know this drug from the books already, and I wasn't expecting it to make an appearance in the show. Not yet anyway. Victor just seems to be getting worse and worse as each episode goes by. Torturing Raphael last week, now getting Izzy addicted to Yin Fen. I'm really worried about what this is going to do to Izzy now, because I am assuming that she's going to get addicted to it. I do remember the cast saying that Izzy's character was going to go to dark places this season. I really didn't expect that to be Yin Fen related, but here we go. So yeah, I am interested to see what direction this storyline is going to take. So the last thing I want to talk about is the funeral scene. In this episode we get to see a Shadowhunter funeral for the first time. I love the way the ceremony was done. I thought it was filmed beautifully, and I love that we get the chance to actually see that. Even though I'm still not 100% certain that Jocelyn is dead, I am convinced that there's more to this than what we know. It was still a heartbreaking scene. Also, we had the Silent Brothers that had died as well, Brother Jeremiah being one of them. What frustrated me is that Simon and Luke weren't allowed in the funeral, obviously because they're downworlders and the Clave clamping down on downworlders being in the Institute. Once again, it's just showing how sick the Clave are for denying people who loved Jocelyn access to her funeral. Like, regardless of whether they're a wolf or a vampire, they were like family to her. So the fact that they weren't allowed in just makes me so mad. I hate the Clave. I really hate the Clave. So we don't see Luke throughout this whole episode, and then we see him at the very end. He's in a forest, and something is going on with regards to his transformation. I am still confused as to what that scene means. I don't know whether this is just his transformation into a wolf going wrong, or whether something has happened, but it looks like he's in some sort of trouble. So I'm really worried about poor Luke. The only thing that I was disappointed with in this episode was the lack of Luke, because I assumed that we'd be seeing Luke's grief this week as well as Clary's. Obviously it would have been heartbreaking, but it was something that I wanted to see. But if he's got a storyline going on outside of that, and that's why he wasn't included in this episode, then I'll understand. I just need to find out what's going on with him, because I worry about poor Luke. I don't want him being hurt, because he's just such a pure and precious character. Protect Luke, please. And that was how the episode ended, with Luke in the forest. There was a lot going on in this episode, but I really enjoyed it. I liked that it seemed a bit more darker and twisted from the other episodes so far this season. I'm still disturbed by that demon. Also, the warlock responsible for all of the shit going down in this episode, did manage to escape. And on her way out, she reminded Alec and the others that Clary still owed her a favour. So I am assuming that isn't the last we've seen of that warlock, because these favours, they always come back. So I'm thinking she will return at some point and demand another favour of Clary. So that's a thing that we can look forward to in the future. So once again, I really liked the pacing of this episode. I liked the fight scenes at the end as well. I thought they were well choreographed. There was also a training scene between Izzy and Jace, and I love that scene because the training scenes in this season just seem to be really great. And it was also nice to see just a scene between Izzy and Jace as well, without the others being there, because we don't really get to see just the two of them interact that much. So I was happy to see that. And yeah, so I really liked this episode because I didn't really know what it had in store for us. So it was exciting. I have seen the promo for next week, and honestly, I don't know how I'm going to survive because we have Malec's first date and we have the Iron Sisters. All of that in one episode. I mean, can you not? Can you give me a break? So I can't wait to talk to you all about that. Please do let me know what thoughts and feelings you had about this episode. I will be back again next week to talk to you about Malec's first date. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!